Good afternoon, and welcome to the League of Biblical Enthusiasts, Episode 4. How did it turn out that 4 of the original 7 scrolls found in Cave 1 in Qumran in 1947 wound up in the hands of the Israelis? Among these 4 scrolls was the queen of all scrolls found, that is the great Isaiah scroll. Well, the story is fascinating. It involves a lot of money, secrets, false identities, spying, and the story is worthy to be told. It's not often told, but we will tell it today. Now, we entitle this episode, The Curious Case of Mr. Green. The story begins on a clear and hot summer day, June the 1st, 1954. A Mr. Monty Jacobs was a New York correspondent for the London Jewish Chronicle, which happens to be, to this day, the oldest continuously published Jewish newspaper in the world. Well, he was tipped off by an American friend of a small announcement tucked away in the advertising columns of that day's issue of the Wall Street Journal. Under the heading Miscellaneous for Sale was the following 2-inch by 2-inch paragraph. It read, "The 4 Dead Sea Scrolls, biblical manuscripts dating back to at least 200 BC, are for sale. This would be an ideal gift for an education or religious institution, or by an individual or group. Box F, 206, The Wall Street Journal." Very simple ad. But Mr. Jacobs was curious to find out more about these 4 Dead Sea Scrolls. He had a hunch, and so he called the executive editor of the Wall Street Journal and inquired. The editor said he could not divulge the name of the advertiser due to, of course, company policy, and suggested he just contact the box number in the advertisement and go with that. But then Mr. Jacobs remembered that the famous soldier/archaeologist Yigael Yadin had just arrived in New York City on a speaking tour. Certainly he would be interested, very interested, in these 4 scrolls. And why? You see, General Yadin's father was none other than Eliezer Sukenik, the famous Israeli archaeologist and founder of the Hebrew University's Department of Archaeology. Dr. Sukenik was aware of the 4 other scrolls. In 1947, the original 7 Dead Sea Scrolls were found in Cave 1 at Qumran, and at risk to his own life, he acquired 3 of the 4. The other 4, those for sale in the Wall Street Journal, had wound up in the possession of Mar Athanasius Samuel, who was metropolitan of the Syrian monastery of St. Mark in the old city of Jerusalem. Now, a metropolitan is roughly equivalent to what we would think of as a bishop. So back in 1948, Dr. Sukenik had negotiated with the bishop for their purchase. But due to delay in communications and complicated by the tense political situation in Jerusalem at the time, the talks broke down. He was extremely disappointed. The Metropolitan moved to the United States in 1949 and took the 4 scrolls with him. He was convinced they would command a much higher price here. The Jordanian government was not very happy with this move, as they considered they were the sole owner of the scrolls. So after an exhibit at the Library of Congress, the bishop deposited the 4 scrolls in a vault of the Trust Company Bank in Journal Square, Jersey City, New Jersey, just across the river from Manhattan. And he waited for a more opportune time. 6 years passed. Needless to say, he was eager for a sale. So now that takes us to New York City, on that June day in 1954. Monty Jacobs had just called General Yadin about the sale of those 4 Dead Sea Scrolls as advertised in the journal. General Yadin was very excited about the possibility of those being the 4 scrolls that his father had so dearly wanted for Israel, and he asked Monty to come to see him immediately. So Monty hurried to the St. Moritz Hotel overlooking Central Park. It's now today the Ritz-Carlton. He caught an elevator to the 30th floor, met General Yadin, showed him the advertisement, and General Yadin read it and reread it with enthusiasm. With the enticing possibility that these scrolls could be what he was hoping for, General Yadin devised a secret and somewhat complicated plan to purchase them. He knew that the bishop would not willingly sell them to an Israeli, the Israeli government, or himself due to the current tensions in the Arab-Israeli situation, unfortunately, a situation which unfortunately exists to this day. The bishop knew Yadin personally, and therefore he could not be knowingly involved in the transaction. General Yadin's first order of business was to find a respectable and reliable firm who could handle negotiations but had no obvious connections to Israel. They soon found one, and that firm and all parties were sworn to secrecy. But how would they purchase these 4 scrolls? The deal was assumed to come at a cost of somewhat under $1 million. The money should come quickly because General Yadin had to return to Israel in early July, shortly a month later. Thankfully, financing was secured, and the next plan was to authenticate the scrolls. Who would authenticate them? How would we know they were the real deal? What person had the qualifications to do so? The obvious choice was General Yadin, but of course he was a known public figure, he was known to the bishop, and he could not be involved. A search was made, and they found a trusted archaeologist with scholarly credentials who could, in fact, verify the scrolls. This is where we meet Mr. Green. Dr. Harry Olinsky, a professor of religion and Hebrew Bible scholar, was called upon to authenticate the scrolls, and here is his account of how he was involved in the plan. On July 1st, 1954, a month after Mr. Monty Jacobs had tipped off General Yadin about the advertisement, Dr. Orlinski had just dropped off his 2 sons at Grand Central Station, where they would take the train to summer camp in Connecticut. He and his wife returned to Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, and were packing for their trip. The car was packed, and with keys in his hand to lock the front door, he heard the phone ring. Well, he hesitated. He wondered, should I? 3 or 4 rings went by. He picked up the phone, and we are all glad that he did. It, of course, was General Yadin calling from the Israeli consulate on 70th Street in Manhattan and asked that Dr. Orlinski come to his office at once. He and his wife arrived about an hour later or so. General Yadin explained the entire situation to Dr. Orlinski. Time was of the essence, and here is the plan. Dr. Orlinski was to assume the name Mr. Green, and that person was an expert on behalf of the purchaser of the scrolls. He was to take a taxi to the Lexington Avenue entrance of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, where the Chemical Bank and Trust Company had a branch. He was to make sure he was not being followed. A Mr. Sidney Astridge would be waiting for him there, and they had both been told how to identify each other. He would be escorted downstairs to the vault of the bank. When he arrived at the vault, he reported it was stuffy, hot, and poorly lit, and before him was a large black trunk on the floor. Out of this trunk were displayed to him 4 scrolls. The most important and impressive was what we now know to be the Great Isaiah Scroll. And the reason he was uniquely qualified to validate the scrolls is that back in 1950, a photo reproduction of the Isaiah Scroll had been made available to him and a few members of the American Schools of Oriental Research, so he had seen much of it and had studied it. The representative for the seller, the bishop, was a Christian Arab merchant from Boston who became a little suspicious about why Mr. Green wanted to see so much of the scroll. As Mr. Green kept asking, unroll it a little more. But Mr. Green assured him he just wanted to make sure the scroll was intact and undamaged. This seemed to satisfy the merchant from Boston. Mr. Green continued then to examine the other 3 scrolls. What we now know is the Habakkuk scroll, the Manual of Discipline, and a 4th scroll which was in poor condition, but is now known to us as the Genesis Apocryphon. Satisfied in his own mind, Mr. Green left the vault. He went immediately to a telephone booth upstairs and phoned the Israeli consulate at an unlisted phone number. If the scrolls were authentic, he was to say only the code word L'chaim, which we all know is to life. The phone was answered. He spoke the words L'chaim, hung up the receiver, and went outside to take a taxi to the consulate. He was to be sure again he was not being followed. And if he felt that he was being followed, he was to get out of the taxi, walk down the street a little bit, and hail another one. He arrived at the consulate and met with General Yadin, and they celebrated their important event. Mr. Green, or Dr. Orlinski, was now finally free to go to his trip in Toronto, which he quickly and happily did. But he was sworn to secrecy not to breathe a word until all 4 scrolls were safely in Israel. The purchase price was $250,000, equivalent in 2023's money to almost $3 million. The scrolls were flown to Israel by airplane one at a time, each scroll with a code name in Hebrew. Once they all arrived in Israel, they were hailed as Israeli national treasures. And in 1965, they were deposited in a specially made building in Jerusalem for protection and viewing. And of course, we know that building as the Shrine of the Book, now a wing of the Israel Museum. And you can view the Great Isaiah Scroll there today, along with the Aleppo Codex and others. Now, how do we know this story from Dr. Orlinski? Well, because he tells us about it in his book, Essays in Biblical Culture and Translation. I just happen to have an autographed copy. I'm a proud papa. So that's the story, and I'm sticking to it. And there are many, many other fascinating stories like this, some with a happy ending, some with a very sad ending, such as the story of the Shapira Scrolls. Perhaps we'll go into another episode about the Aleppo Codex. Wonderful find, another fascinating story, full of adventure. But I'll leave that for you to think about. I hope this has been interesting for you, informative, enlightening, maybe not entertaining, but if you have any comments that you'd like to leave us, if you know about this story and have details that we have yet talked about, please feel free, put them in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and like, and to share this video and the channel with others. Now, I do happen to have some books, maybe for a giveaway down the road. Some of these books are duplicates. I buy books and I'll go to a bookstore and I'll think to myself, do I have this book? I'm not really sure. I'll buy it, and of course I come home and I've already got it. So I have several duplicate books. Others I have read and I'm happy with what I've learned from them, and would be happy to give them away. Maybe we'll do a contest, a drawing, who knows. One of these is the little pocket Greek New Testament. If you're interested in studying Greek or having a copy of the Greek New Testament, here it is, the Nestle Alan version. Also, Wide in the Waters, Story of the English Bible and the Revolution it inspired. Wonderful book. Similarly, a visual history of the King James Bible, full of facts information about the translation, the translators, their background, the political situation, so forth and so on. You will learn a ton from it. This is an awesome book, The Search for Lost Manuscripts and Records by Leo Duell. This tells the story of scholar adventurers who went on a hunt for ancient manuscripts. What were they looking for? How did they find them? What adventures did they go through? What were the results of their find and for scholarship today and for biblical understanding today? This is just amazing. And last but not least, we have other books, but this is one, The Story of the Bible by Larry Stone. Now, this is amazing because it has a number of pull-out manuscripts from a number of different famous manuscripts. Some of them are life-size, beautiful reproductions. Anyway, I'm going to leave you with that. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. We will see you in the next one. Have a good week.